Hello, I'm your host, Frederic Joye, and today we're continuing with our three-part series of podcasts regarding fixed price projects versus open-ended contracts. So today's podcast is our wrap-up installment in our three-part series on software projects, looking at all the questions. First, are free appraisals really ever free? Second episode was why fixed projects are so often leading to disappointment. And today, we're looking at how clients can wield predictability to mitigate risk in their project. And so if you haven't listened to the first two episodes yet, I would recommend you do and add them to your playlist next. And today we've got a lot to cover in this wrap up, and I am again excited to welcome Nigel Gorham in this show, an experienced technologist based in Sydney who currently works in the ad tech sector, but also worked for many years in custom software development projects and product development. Nigel's run many software projects, some as the service provider and some as the client. So his perspective is based on a working knowledge of what's at stake in the client-supplier engagement, from managing expectations and budgets through requirements gathering, estimation, project management, product development, and delivery. So I'm happy to have Nigel on the show again today for this new project. And we've actually worked on a number of projects together over the last 5 years, and we're looking forward to the next one. So welcome to our last episode of the series, Nigel.
Thank you, Fred. And I'm excited to do this wrap up. It's been a good series.
Cool. And so lastly, to give you a heads up, we'll try to use again the format of what I call the 3-minute drill. One of us will ask questions and the other one will have 3 minutes to answers as comprehensively as possible. I think this episode is a lot to unpack again, so we'll try our very best, but if needed, we'll just go beyond the 3 minutes. So I guess let's get into it.
Yeah. So I'm going to begin by asking you some questions, Fred. And I think for our audience, they might be wondering, what on earth are they talking about? You know, wielding predictability, making it sound like, you know, you're kind of taking up a sword, you know, to fight off the risks of your project. So maybe let's start, Fred, with maybe you can tell us what you mean by an open-ended contract.
Yeah. So open-ended contracts, they're simply where the client and the provider agree to work together in a predictable way with a guaranteed minimum billing obligation if the contract is terminated. So it's usually a very small obligation in proportion to the size of the project. So for example, let's say the project needs 2 Node.js developers for 6 months. So at any time during the 6 months period, the client can walk away, but is committed to a minimum of the current month plus 1 month cost for the resources. Or so for example, if the client wants to terminate the contract on let's say March 30th, he would be engaged until April 30th. So the termination notice would come March 30th, and then the actual end of the contract would be April 30th.
Cool. Okay, so that's great. But now can you maybe point out to us what you feel are the predictable areas of this type of project or contract? And also maybe share with us where it's applicable, how this is very different to a fixed price contract arrangement.
Yeah. So I think we could have like 3 parts of this predictable areas. So the first one is the predictable contract areas. The second one is the environment and client behavior as predictable areas. And then lastly, it's the supplier provider behavior as predictable area. So let me start with the first one. So the contract areas that are predictable. So firstly, the team resources are usually dedicated to your project for as long as possible, but in tranches of 4 weeks. So this is around 160 hours of work per person per month per developer. So this guarantees that there's no split interest or competing priorities for the developers or the people working on the project. it's like focus specialists on that are really focused on getting your project done. So this means like compared to other ways of working, like some agencies sometimes work on multiple projects at the same
Right.
time with
Yeah.
like a fixed cost project or a small amount of hours every month, like on a retainer basis, where the developers are jumping from one project to another, and the client just sees that the work is moving forward at a certain pace, but doesn't really know what's happening really behind it. So there's in these cases where the developers are spread across multiple areas or multiple projects, then they have competing priorities because each and every project is urgent. So in this open-ended contract with like full-time dedicated resources, so it's important to have that mentioned, then you get the full attention of the developers working on your project. The second one, we kind of covered it in the description of the open-ended contract, is that there's a capped commercial exposure. Because the billing is from month to month, then the only commitment is for the next month, really. So this is also again different from like the fixed cost projects, where usually providers would require a minimum down payment of, let's say, 50% of the project, regardless of how the project is going, and then maybe they have some other payments with milestones. But usually it's like maybe 50% down, then another, I don't know, 40%, and then the last 10% that is paid by the client when everything's been validated, and is good to go. So in this open-ended contract model, then you have a really much more limited exposure. The next point is the knowledge retention. So it is determined by the commitment, and what we can guarantee in most of the cases, or all of the cases actually, is that the IP belongs to the project owner and not the provider, because the work is being paid on an ongoing basis and is delivered to the client on an ongoing basis, and we require the client to look at what is being delivered to them on a bi-weekly basis, for example. It belongs to them right away. And what is also key to optimizing how the project is being developed over the years or the months or the years is the retention of your dedicated resources, right? The more people work on a project, the longer they do, the more they know about the product, and the better they become at or the more efficient they become over time. So we usually think that 2 to 3 months to get into a project that has been started already is the time that is needed for a developer to be really well versed in the project. Just like when you're adding a team member
Yeah.
in your
It's
own
like
company.
onboarding. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Um, the next point is really the transparency, because teams are working together both with the client and the provider. So there are regular review points. It could be uh, every 2 weeks or every week. In most cases, actually, there is a daily stand up that's done between the two teams just to discuss what's been done, what is to be done for the day, and then maybe some points that are to be looked into to help move the project forward quicker.
Okay. So Fred,
um,
can I just ask? So
yeah.
what you're talking about there is you're talking about this is an open-ended contract with a client who has their own internal team, their own internal
Hmm.
resources, and they're engaging a software partner who's
Yeah.
also supplementing that team. So
Yeah.
so those two teams meeting together on a regular basis for the
Yeah.
transfer. Right. Okay.
Right, but it could also work in the setup where the client doesn't have the technological abilities to run a project development team, and so in that case we would play the role of the senior architect
Right.
or
Right.
the project management side of things,
Okay.
but would still be in touch with the client to clarify
Of
requirements,
course.
to show what's been done, and so there might even be like some daily, discussions between the project manager, the business analyst, and the product owner on the client side.
And
So
do you,
it can work with both kinds of teams.
sorry, one other question. Does your interpretation of open-ended contracts, I mean, as far as that transparency is concerned, do you use, software applications
Yeah,
for sharing that information? I know that that's a popular theme in this area.
yeah, yeah. So of course, so we use Jira as the
Okay.
the tool that's running for managing our projects, and then all our developers are actually providing a daily report of what's been done, and this is so it's documented and it's sent to the client on a daily basis
Right.
and on a weekly basis. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
So they know at any time what's being done, how much has been worked on,
Right.
what features and so on. Yeah. So the next step after the transparency is how do we rebalance the resource needs, like scaling up or scaling down, and this also allows a lot of flexibility because when we're talking about resources, it's easy to add resources on demand, um, on a full-time basis for developers, but also for what we call tactical skills that are supporting the development team, such as UI, UX design, business analysis, maybe some high-level architecture or some support for cloud infrastructure. They're simply billed by the hour, so it's very easy to have them come in and go for a couple hours, and it's usually pretty efficient. And our clients actually pretty, I mean, like the fact that we're able to support them with a lot more functions than just the development.
Okay. So
Um,
rebalancing is that's a predictable area that people should
yeah,
expect in open-ended contracts?
absolutely. Not all teams require often rebalancing, but some teams do, and then sometimes there's a side project that
Okay.
the client wants to work on. So we can add a few
Ah,
resources for a couple months here and there, and then it scales back down when things go a bit more quiet on the
okay.
client side. And so the last point really is this sense of control that people have. Because the resources are really at the discretion of the client. Um, when they have the ability to manage these teams, meaning that when they have the technological expertise inside and have maybe a team with them, then the resources are completely at their discretion. They can manage their tasks on a daily basis. When they don't have this knowledge or the technical ability to manage a software development team, they're a bit less at their discretion, but they have to trust us to do the right thing with the resources and work on the priorities that the client has set. So we just taking a little bit of this responsibility to make sure that every person in the team is working on the right thing at the right time. Um, and so, but in general, it's the client who's setting the priorities based on the requirements and maybe the discoveries, of the business, how things go when things change in the business. So it really offers, I think, a true agile process to manage the project as people would manage their own business.
Okay. And so you were saying when I was asking the question about what are these predictable areas of an open-ended contract, you were talking about these are the ones that are specific to the actual project, but you also
Yeah.
felt that there were some that fell in terms of like the environment or the behavior of the client and also the supplier. Do you can you
Well, yeah,
can you share with us, your thoughts on
right.
those things?
Yeah. And so that's really where these open-ended contracts, I think, make a huge difference, is because the project is going to evolve um, um, given on like external factors. So like exactly first the maybe the environment or the client behavior, and so the project can actually change based on these criteria. So for example, it's like new information during the project, so input from the marketplace or input from the development team as they're implementing, and this will influence the project priorities. And then as we go, we see that we could potentially minimize some developments and therefore the cost in some areas because maybe stuff is not needed anymore, or something has been done for one module that could be reused in another module. So we have opportunities to minimize the costs, and sometimes we also have like really change requests, right? And um, so then we adapt and revise the software as it goes, which is something you really cannot do in fixed price
No.
contracts, or you have to do this as a trade-off
Mm,
for new features in, but then you
yeah.
have to slash a bunch of features that were planned for the same amount of time. So this provides a lot more flexibility. Yeah.
And on the
Um,
and what about on the supplier side? Is there anything
yeah.
we need to know about how it is that you feel, Arcanys or a software partner, um, how you behave or what your
Yeah.
expectations are that can be considered predictable?
Yeah. So uh, I think this framework allows us to really deliver results that lead to really good long-term partnerships. Uh, because we are in a flexible work arrangement where we just have to do our best to get from A to B, um, then we can also give a lot of input to our clients on how to optimize processes, because we have a bunch of specialists that usually for our own control of the quality of the delivery that we do. We have our own specialists that come and have a look in the project and see, okay, are we good with the quality of what we're producing? Is there anything we could improve in the way we are helping the client, or maybe could we even help the client in running his team in a better way? Sometimes our clients are super mature and they know how to run a team like extremely well, and in some areas, in some cases, clients are a bit more less mature than us, and then we see opportunities where we can help them out to just become more efficient as a business. um, yeah, and in some cases, we do invest in some of our clients with software development services in exchange for equity to help accelerate the growth of the business. So in this case, it strengthened the relationship even more because we are becoming a really long-term partner
Right.
that is really vested even more in the success of the
Yeah. I
client.
mean, you're becoming a
Yeah,
stakeholder in their business, right?
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay. That's
yeah,
interesting. I don't
yeah,
know that we have time to go into that today, but maybe that's something else we can look at in the future.
yeah, yeah. I think we could look into this in a next episode. Yeah,
Cool. Well, okay. So thinking about all those as predictable areas, so things that the client or the supplier can count on within the bounds of that open-ended contract. I guess it's only logical to kind of break that down and think of that as a list of pros and cons.
yeah.
So, if you can share with us what you think are the obvious pros and the obvious, against
Yeah.
for this kind of approach? That'd be good.
Yeah. So, uh, as we said earlier, so there's a maximum commercial exposure that's really low. It's usually just the current month plus the 30 days
Right.
really
Yep.
notice. Um, we're on a monthly billing cycle, so on a cash flow perspective, it's pretty low commit. I mean, low commitment. It depends on the size of the team, obviously, but then it's just a 1 month um, uh, cash out, really. Um, I would say there's also a lot of the control over the project because the client is really controlling the priorities and the task allocation on the project. They are in total control of what's being done, so they can measure what's being done and how fast it's moving, and so they know what the team is doing and how well they perform. They can check the code right away, so they have complete transparency over what's happening. They can also, of course, scale up or down the team as needed. Um, there are We don't have any upfront costs usually, so there's no recruitment fees, no placement fees, no surprise costs. Really, everything's fairly straightforward. We don't overbill for the risk of failure of a project like some do in a fixed cost because they gave a fixed cost, they have to have a buffer for like unexpected stuff. We don't have that. Um, and the last thing that's really something we do is this good partner guarantee where when people hire developers with us, they have this 2 weeks time frame where they can test the developer and make sure it's the right fit for them. And if it's not, then there's nothing that's due to us. Um, but over the years, we've measured that we have a 97% success guarantee when we place a developer. So yeah,
Wow.
that's why we can offer this guarantee.
Wow. Okay. And how
Yeah,
about the cons of an open-ended contract?
yeah. So um, obviously, we're working on these open-ended contracts because we think there are much less cons than on the fixed cost projects. And I'm going to list a bunch of cons, and I feel like most of them, they also are cons that are in the fixed price project. And so the first one would be the continuity. Um, we can't really stop and go on a project simply because we are, putting teams together where they learn, they get onboarded, and then we can't. If the project is stopping, then usually there's another client that is in need of developers, and so they go to another project. We cannot keep them on the bench doing nothing, right? Um, so it's the same as um, you having full-time staff. Uh, you don't hire and fire as the business needs come and go in your own team. But with an outsourcing partner, then the cost is already uh, pretty low. And we also have the flexibility to scale up and down the team. And we always recommend actually to keep a base team of at least one or two developers that would keep the knowledge and then help retrain if needed on the provider side. If the team gets disbanded, then of course there's a learning curve for the new developers. But that's the case in any type of engagement, because like agencies that work a few hours here and there on project usually make it even more messy because it's never the same guy that's working on it. So yeah. So there's another risk that is, I think, really tied to this kind of project, like the open-ended contract. There might be a risk of like scope creep if the in-house team of the client is just adding features and features and features without the management controlling, the project. So because it's just so because the roadmap and the features of a project should always be in control of the client. So we make sure that the client understands that he is responsible to manage the scope of the project. Sometimes we feel like the deadlines are not moving forward to deliver something, but the features keep on being added. So then we would ring, the alarm to the client and say, "Look, your team is adding stuff, and then the deadline is not, being pushed further." So uh, you gotta choose what you want to do. So that's our way of like helping the client being aware of like there's a slippage there might be a slippage in the deadlines. Um, and I think the last thing is if you really end up with a bad supplier, I mean with bad developers, your project might suffer. But if you have a technical team, so if you know what you're doing, you're technically savvy, um, and because you're in control of the project, you can control the output of the developers. You can see the code, so you can see the quality of what they're doing. You can see like how they solve problems, and so you can stop this from happening really quickly if you see that your provider is really bad. If you don't have that ability and then you end up with a bad supplier, the risk is a bit bigger. And then in this case, we'd advise you to have maybe a consultant on your end that could, peek into the project and see what is the quality of the provider. And in our case, when the client doesn't have this technological ability, we have what we call an on-demand CTO. So basically, it's our employee, our senior architects, looking into what the developers are doing and making sure that we are at the highest quality of the output from our team. And this requires, of course, the client to trust us as doing the right thing for them.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
in that instance, you're talking about part of that transparency um, that really works to the advantage of the client is to make sure that you're using a Git or something like
Yeah.
a repo
Oh yeah.
where they're looking directly at the coded solution and able to sort of scrutinize the quality of what's being produced. So,
Right.
so the con for the client is if they don't have someone with that technical capability of reviewing the code, then they could be exposed. But you're saying that that at least your business does have senior architects who are in a position to be engaged to assist with making sure that those sorts of problems don't arise for
Yeah.
clients. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
Um, so, um, because I've been talking about all these pros and cons and the predictable areas. So maybe you could tell us what's been your experience of open-ended contracts as a client.
Yeah. Look, for a long time, I think I was actually quite scared of running projects with open-ended contracts, whether it was for companies that I was working for or even, doing personal projects, home renovations and things like that. I think, yeah, I was often reluctant to engage in what I would call, and it's kind of like an old term now, is time and materials type contracts. Um, I think just like everybody else, I put it down to a combination of things. It's how I personally view, you know, uh, costs versus outcomes, my own personal experiences of other projects, and also the impact of other people's experiences in similar field, right? So, the first thing you do is you compare what's in front of you with what somebody else has done, and you try to get a sense of what's going to happen to you or whatever. So speaking frankly, like I am the kind of person who wants a definitive cost for something I'm buying. I want to know that I'm going to get good value for it. I'm I tend to be a person who has, high expectations of others, and I kind of hope for a greater return than my investment. Um, but I think overall, I try to balance that off with uh, keeping the perspective. Well, if I was trying to do that myself, what would I, you know, um, how long would it take me, and so on. So I think my experience is like many others, and so I think for a long time, especially earlier in my career, I was attracted to fixed price contracts. I believed in the protection that I thought that fixed price contracts were offering me, and I admit I probably gave a lot more attention to the horror stories of blown out projects and companies losing money than I ever did to understanding total cost of ownership, you know? And I put that down to a lack of experience and probably, some self doubts that played out in my decision making. And so, you know, it took me a long time to slowly piece together my own experiences and begin to realize how, this concept of total cost of ownership could actually help me properly frame the worries that I had and the concerns that I had. And that then influenced, helping me make better decisions about the projects. So, by the way, total cost of ownership, for anyone listening who doesn't know what it is, it's the sum total of all the areas of your project. So if it's the dollar figure, it's essentially the dollar figure you never see on a piece of paper because it's not in the quote, because it includes everything from the time that it takes to establish your relationship with that client or supplier. It's the detail of the project. It's all the different personalities involved and how to manage those relationships. Not to mention what happens past the original like build of your product in your project. It goes into then your total cost of ownership includes, what it takes to maintain and optimize your software and support your customer base as they work with your product. So, the more fixed pricing engagements that I had, managing, both as a client and as a provider, the more I became sort of frustrated by the limitations that I was up against. I found myself arguing for the flexibility that I needed in the project, but then I'd have to rebuke myself and tell myself, no, you can't bring that up because you signed up for this type of arrangement. It's a self-imposed, restriction. And so, thinking about fixed price contracts, I was thinking this is kind of like the devil you know versus the devil you don't, and it was always playing out in my mind, and I realized fixed price contracts were not everything that I thought they would be. So, and where that plays out, because of course we're talking about how this frames, running projects in an open-end contract model. Suddenly, features that aren't great in implementation become, sticky points in discussions with prospective clients, and that becomes, a disappointment to an existing client who's anticipating, the benefits of your next release. So, to make matters worse, to fix those issues that you've encountered through your fixed price contract, what are your options? Your options are you can go back to the original supplier and engage with them in the next phase. But of course, you're going to do that off the back of, having a bad taste in your mouth over that experience. The other option you have is you can start the process all over again and start looking for a new supplier, and that's a horrible idea.
Yeah,
And
that's not good.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then finally, you can say, okay, well, that's not working. Maybe I need to bring the entire project in-house and do it ourselves. But you can't forget that when you choose to do that, you're then signing up for all the recruitment processes, how to onboard people, manage the financial aspects of that, and all, all the personal expectations that go along with that as well. So I guess, what I came to realize over time was that most of the suppliers I engaged with, they really valued three things, irrespective of the project they tackled. And I thought about those things: fixed price, ongoing, fixed price, ongoing. What's it, are these expectations different? And I realized they kind of weren't. So maybe what I need to do is actually focus on what those expectations were to get a better sense of how I can control and work better in these open-ended contracts. So, like, what are the expectations of those of the suppliers? They want to produce good work, and they want your respect. They want clients who are good at describing what they need. And they also love clients who are good at making decisions, right, on the fly. So, I thought, like, I can do that. Actually, I already am doing that on my projects, on my fixed price projects, the ones that are frustrating me. So I thought, if I can make them feel valued, and if I can give them direction and accurate information when they need it, then they're likely to be motivated, stay on track, waste less time, raise questions early. And all those things sound like the beginning of a good relationship, right? So suddenly, in the context of the life of the products or projects I was working on, I realized that maybe with an open-ended contract, this was actually, if I could stay on top of those things, maybe an open-ended contract would actually work in my favor. So, as a simple breakdown, and using, I think, what you described as predictable areas, both in terms of the contract engagement and also the behaviors of both the client and the supplier, I realized I could use those predictable areas to relate, that relate to running the project, and combine that. I'm going to rework that. So, as a simple breakdown, using what you described as predictable areas, I realized I could use the predictable areas that relate to running the project and combine them with the predictable behavior and expectations of the software partner, and work those things, to our advantage as far as budgeting and optimizing the product are concerned. So I know I'm taking a long time to get to the point, but really it took me a long time to realize this. And then once I realized it, the only way I could really work out whether these perceived benefits of an open-ended contract are going to work is if I put it to the test,
Yeah.
So,
And that's very important. Sorry to interrupt, but it's
yeah,
very important that you explain to us your thought process, because you've been, on the two sides of the fence, but with like fixed cost and open-ended. Plus, you've been, working on this project as a supplier and as a client.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, like I was, I was a little scared, but I realized that it was time to maybe explore a small open-ended contract with a new provider, and I would just work on the basis that I'd stick to the plan, measure the outcome, and so one project became two projects became four projects, and interestingly, the development costs were still in line with what I expected from the fixed price contracts, but the difference in the style of working was huge, So I became focused on, instead of being hung up on, trying to keep everything, wound tight and on schedule, my focus shifted more towards, getting the most bang for buck, the most value for money from each cycle of work that we were doing. I became focused on, like, unearthing the questions that the supplier under a fixed price contract was previously reluctant to ask, and I was trying to dig for those questions and then get the answers for those questions as quickly as possible, you know, um, so that we could move from task to task without holdups and without sort of the confusion that kind of eats away at budgets, you know. So the frequency of communication in an open-ended contract, I think, is, you know, it's another level. It's another level. Um, I realized it had to increase, but in turn, you know, it also improved the relationship with the supplier, and the supplier was also able to make suggestions about how I could, you know, track progress of the team through systems they use with other clients. And, you know, just like you were talking about Jira, that became a huge advantage to me because, you know, instead of being asking the guys, you know, how they're tracking against that module or that task, you know, I could see the progress itself, and I knew that before I'd enter into, you know, these stand-up meetings and so on. And so now my concerns move to matters of, you know, the other matters, which were the cons you were talking about. They were things like, you know, matters of continuity and how we rebalance the resources, you know, as we needed. And this is where, you know, investing deeply in your provider or your software partner really pays off, I think, because, you know, you avoid carrying more resources than you need to. And instead, what you do is you work on good strategies to balance your needs ongoing while you still maintain the collective knowledge of your team. You know, kind of like what you were saying. You might have a team of 6 guys, and you know, but after a year, maybe it's actually, you know, it's more pertinent to scale that back to 3 guys ongoing. You know, because that's a better fit. And so on, you know, and so all these things work for, you know, the better relationship, and it just became easier for me to work through the issues and difficulties that you know, come up through the project, because now I wasn't thinking about, you know, things in a very fixed constraint. The open-ended contract kind of gave me the opportunity to just work in smaller cycles, be more nimble, react better, make decisions that were financially viable for the business. So look, you know, and that really brings me back around to the original point that I was talking about with total cost of ownership, because on balance, I'm surprised how effective it has been to work with a partner in an open-ended contract. You know, I don't, I'll say I don't believe, but I know that we haven't been actually disadvantaged in any way. And I'm quite certain that we've gotten better value for money, especially now that we have a partner we trust, we rely on, and, you know, we have an open door relationship with, which is critical for, you know, solving those sorts of problems. So I realize that that's a very long explanation of my experience with open-ended contracts, but without the context of knowing where I came from and how I ended up, you know, convinced that this was just a better arrangement for the projects that I work on and the businesses I
Yeah,
work for.
yeah. I
Yeah,
think it's very important to explain the you know the thought process and the experience behind. I mean, dealing with both kinds of of types of billings or contracts,
mm,
and then understanding what yeah what you got out of that.
yeah. So, Fred, is in your opinion, are there any particular people, groups, companies that open-ended contracts are best suited to?
Yeah, so um, I would say most, I mean, most of the time it's really like clients looking at building a dedicated team as an extension of their own team. So meaning that they have the technical ability to manage a team in-house, so they understand what it takes to build software. And we actually like this idea of hybrid teams, and our clients actually really like it too, because kind of yields the best results in terms of the costs and performance over the long run. Um, and I would say the second part is clients who are willing to take the entrepreneurial risk of building software as a core function of their business. Because I mean, that's what we see, but most of our clients, they are running on the software we're building with them. So I think, yeah, it's not for these small projects just to build a corporate website or a really small app. But if you're willing to build a business based on the applications that you want to get built, then that's, I think, the setup you would want to I mean, set yourself up for success.
Right. I can think of, there's a couple of things that are coming to mind straight away, though. I'm sure lots of clients are asking you, like when,
Yeah.
don't, do they ever ask you like, don't, time billing arrangements cause like a conflict of interest under an open-ended contract?
Yeah. I actually hear that question sometimes, and I mean, do they ask themselves this question when they are hiring people, on their own team? Like it could be the same with an employee that is slacking. Why would an employee do that? Um, and because the client has the ability to check the output of our developers. It shouldn't happen. There shouldn't be a conflict of interest actually um, for the developer, because I mean they know, our clients know what needs to be done. They know how long it takes, and we are completely transparent, so everybody knows. The developers cannot hide between. I mean, with they cannot hide, and they cannot hide from us as the responsibility of us providing really good developers, and then they cannot hide from the client who's actually checking the job that we're doing. So, and also because we as a company, we're in the long term game, and because we benefit from our clients growing as fast as possible, then it can't really happen, because if they're happy with us and their business is doing well, they will increase the team they have with us. So it's always kind of like a win-win situation if everything works well on both ends, and we certainly make sure that on our end we control as much as we can to boost the productivity of our people.
Right. So you're saying that clients under an open-ended contract with you are essentially accessing their team resources from the supplier in the same way they access their own employees, and
Yeah,
they and their expectations of their employees are effectively projected onto their extended team. And
yeah,
so there's accountability there. Okay, so
yeah.
that leads me to the next question, which is, well, what do you do, or what happens, if there's a team resource that's underperforming?
So yeah, our job firstly is to make sure that the developers are happy, motivated, working on interesting projects. So this goes also to when we receive an inquiry from a client, we just make sure also that the type of work that will the client wants us to do is going to be interesting for our developers. So if we think that the project is not interesting, we don't take the client. We don't work with the client, because um, it would then go down to maybe unhappiness of the developers, higher turnover, and maybe some performance issues because the project is not interesting. So we avoid that in the first place. Um, and then, if something happens on the project that we've chosen to work on, and then we see that there's a performance issue from, maybe a resource or parts of the team, then we first try to understand, okay, what is the root cause of the problem? So we have to do an investigation on our side, but also with the client. We have to try to understand, instead of blaming people right away and just like like taking shortcuts. um, and because we put great care in the recruitment, and when we assign a resource on the project, we do this with the approval of the client. So they interview all the developers that join their teams, issues are pretty rare. We do a really huge amount of work in making sure that we get the right people in the company. So we hire only, I think, 1.5% of the people that send us their resumes. Plus, we get the approval of the client with the resource that we suggest that is going to work on the project. So we have like multiple checks there. But once we understand the root cause of the problem, which could be actually a process issue, or like the requirements are not clear enough, or a training issue, so the guy suddenly doesn't have the skills for some stuff that none of us, neither the client or us, would foresee. Or sometimes, which happens as well, the developer has a personal issue, and so we try to address the problem. So fix the process, give training, or give the developer one more chance to improve if he's responsible for the issue, right? And in this particular case, when we solve the problem, like if it's a process issue or training issue, then the problem is solved, right? After a few, a short period of time. But if it's a problem with the developer and the second chance doesn't work, then of course we're going to select another developer to work on the project and give some compensation to the client for the loss of productivity. Usually it's 1 month of for free for a replacement.
That's pretty significant, but it's great to hear that that you take those sorts of things very seriously.
Oh, very seriously, yeah.
Because I know that from a client perspective, that's those sorts of things have been on my mind and have come up in the past. And especially under a fixed price contract arrangement, you really have little or no choice. You can raise these
Yeah,
things, but ultimately everyone's focused on the deliverable, and so
yeah.
it makes it very, very difficult. But yeah, I can't imagine every supplier is in that same position. But you're just sharing that's Arcanys's perspective towards this sort of problem.
Well, because we think that's what should happen
Yeah, yeah.
all the time, right?
It sounds
Yeah.
sounds right to me. So so one thing I want to point out is you keep coming back to you're talking about the open-ended contract working for the benefit of the client because the client remains in control. They can run the teams and their engagement any way they
Yeah.
like. Some people would argue that you're diminishing the responsibility of the provider by doing that. Are you able to share your thoughts about why you think that may not be the case?
Yeah, because a provider can never take the responsibility of the client. So it's not like we take full responsibility of what we're doing, but the client also has to take full responsibility for the success of the project he wants to succeed in, right? And so it's not like something the provider can completely fill in for the client. If the client is not engaged in his project, regardless of its fixed cost or open ended, then it's likely to not succeed. But it's easier to discuss with clients that can see the life of the project and that have a say in the everyday life of the project. So especially we it's giving, of course, it's like let them keep the responsibility by being engaged in the success of the project, right? And so we have to work both hand in hand to improve the collaboration, to improve the skills of the developers with potentially some training, discuss on a weekly basis with the client, and also internally for us to make sure that the project is running smoothly and then give feedback and add value to the client by finding areas of improvement. You can't do this in a fixed cost project because in a fixed cost project, the client is just like thinks that he's handing us like a box of stuff to do, and then disappears and thinks that we can do magic. But that doesn't work like that, right?
Right.
It just doesn't.
Right.
So
Okay.
yeah.
So, all right. So, I think it makes sense to ask the question, how do you believe clients can wield predictability to their advantage within the projects? And can you share any particular stories or examples?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking mostly on the, taking advantage of like the changes in the market that happen, and the flexibility um, that you get from an open-ended contract with a provider that is here to actually help you succeed, right? So we have one client in Australia, in Melbourne, that uh, so during the pandemic, they've been, I mean, the revenues got hit slightly by I mean, the lockdowns and stuff like that. But instead of saying, okay, we're not making as much money, we have to, stop R&D or developing new features. Um, they like, okay, no, let's push the team, and then take advantage of this period where everybody's retrenching to actually, you know try to develop a lot of things, of a lot of new features that then they can push out when business is starting again. And that's what they actually did. And now we're seeing like the results of their, boldness, and the fact that we also were behind them, um, to help them achieve that. Then I think now they're going to explode, really. Um, and and so in other cases, we had one client in Hong Kong where, um, they were, they developed a solution, and they were struggling to meet the market, because they came in at, a high price tag and with a lot of features and stuff like that. But then they realized that they kind of needed to pivot to something rather exclusive, to something a bit more retail, so lowering the price to onboard with their product, and also simplify the features that people could use as um, a self-serve, instead of, having them do a lot of tailored stuff for their clients. And so they were able to pivot at the minimum cost, while keeping, like their legacy team working on the project, and then having some of the developers from that legacy team start on building, or taking that platform to move it to something that would be better tailored to their new audience, or their new target in terms of customers.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, um, would you say there are areas like every business, every supplier is probably going to talk about, points of differentiation, what they do, what they can offer. Um, are there any particular areas of the offering for these open-ended contracts and team engagements through the Arcanys business? Um, are there any unique parts to that offering that you're wanting our audience to understand?
Yeah, so we mentioned a few times about the Arcanys Good Partner Guarantee. Um, and so basically, we give you a 2 week obligation free window to, to start your project with us. So to onboard developers, experience our people, and see our can-do attitude and culture. And so you have these 2 weeks to discover, like what it is for to work with us. And of course, if you like what you see, then your project continues, and we'll just make sure that we keep on, delivering this throughout the months or years that we're going to collaborate together. And if not, then we'll just waive the bill for the first 2 weeks. Of course, any IP that's been produced for you then is not really a deliverable, but I think that's secondary to trying us out. And um, in the last 4 or 5 years, I don't think we had any client who started with us, even if they were a bit doubtful, and that said, like, you know, um, we we don't want to carry on. So we're very, very comfortable about that, and it also helps us. That's the other part. It also helps us also evaluate the client and how they work with our people, and if we think it's a good fit. I mean, usually we do a pretty thorough um, analysis of every client and make sure, because we only want to take projects where we know we can really work well. So, and in some cases, then we also say, look, we've tried to work for 2 weeks, and it's not going to work out. But that's also, again, like, it hasn't happened in many years. Yeah, then we have a second one, um, and it's our, like, a resource fit promise. So we know that the client's experience of us is always a lot more than the original project they engage us for. Um, so it means they need to see, I mean, to like what they see. They need to find value in the breadth and depth of our capabilities, and of course, like the attitude and the culture fit of the company.
So if there's a resource that isn't working, you're committed to finding an alternative resource that will.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole point we discussed
Yeah,
earlier, when there's
yeah,
someone who doesn't fit. But again, it's like we we're so confident then of, because we've done this thousands and thousands
right,
and thousands of times, and we've placed people thousands of times with our clients.
right.
So we know how to evaluate the resources, we know how to present
Okay,
the resource for the client, and the clients, they trust the process, and they also have their own way of evaluating a resource. So when all of
okay,
this is met, then we can really, yeah, uh, without with closed eyes, really, like, make that promise. Yeah,
okay, okay.
yeah. The last one is our commitment to work through any, problems if they arise, and they will. Uh, and I think uh, it's always when things go wrong that you see how good of a partner you have. Right? So it's how do you handle the unexpected, and so the more experienced a provider is, the 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 better they can help out, because they've seen so many of the situations that are maybe unexpected for the
Right,
for the
right,
the clients, but for us they're not unexpected. We've trained for that
right.
many, many times.
Okay,
So yeah.
okay.
um,
So you
yeah.
you, you know your if I summarize that point of differentiation for Arcanys, you just say that the good partner guarantee would be the combination of you have a no obligation free trial, which is at
Yeah.
Arcanys cost. You have that resource fit promise,
Mhm.
and then if at any time you have concerns about your project performance, you guys are committed to working with the clients to address those particular issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um,
Cool.
yeah. And we believe that healthy partnership shares, responsibilities and successes.
Right.
That's how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone likes to be there for the successes. Um, not everyone not everyone likes to have the responsibility that goes with it. But I guess you can't have one without the other, really.
That's right. I think you can only feel success if you've worked hard to go and get it.
Yeah.
Because if there's no effort, there's no success, really, um,
Yeah.
or sense of success. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'm mindful of the length of this podcast, so we should
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
we
yeah.
should
It's
probably wrap things up.
we're
Um,
like, okay, we're a bit over an hour. Yeah,
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 yeah.
absolutely.
Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience today?
Yeah. Okay, I'll try to. I'll try to. So we have completely blown out the 3 minutes, but um, yeah. Um, but so the bottom line is that we've been encouraging people for a few years now to consider that this fixed scope and price projects is really not the option. And I mean, as a provider, we've experienced this from the beginning. We've also had our fair share of hardships with these,
Right,
and they're important freedoms that really will work to the advantage of our clients if they're open to exploring the projects
right.
in this way. And so over the years, software development methodologies have evolved over time, from a waterfall to really various agile ways of doing things, such as double diamond. And also the technologies have evolved, as well as the complexities of the what the software can do. If you think what we could do 10 years ago with stuff in a browser, and today it's just, I mean, the progress is
Yeah,
incredible.
yeah,
And so while a small project like corporate website or small scale mobile applications, they can be done in a fixed cost project way. um, but the industry is moving towards an open-ended contract where the companies assemble teams for a short, medium, or long-term duration for the success of the project in a predictable and controlled setup for all the things we've discussed earlier.
right.
And so, if we jump back at the analogy that you mentioned in our second podcast, Nigel, where you mentioned that the ballroom dancers,
Ah, yeah,
and what we're really talking about um, is a collaboration, partnership between client and software provider,
right,
where both are always thinking about how to draw attention to each other's strength and cover each other's weaker points, so
right.
that, I mean, together the choreography of the routine looks absolutely fantastic, and also that they create the magic through an authentic and compelling performance. So that's what we're trying to do in all our partnerships. um, and yeah, so I think that's putting an end to our 3 episode series. And I wanted to thank you, Nigel, for having done this with me. It's been a great pleasure, and I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to do some more episode in the future with you.
Great. Well, it's been fantastic to be part of the series and to look at the subject matter. I think there are so many people out there trying to run projects, and
Yeah,
they have genuine concerns about these areas, and it's important to talk about these things. So
yeah,
hopefully
yeah.
we've shared some good insights that are going to help people run their projects in a more productive and successful way.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, to your audience, I really hope, and Nigel as well, that you guys all learned something out of this. I would say in-depth look into different ways to working on a software development project. And if you have any questions, so you shouldn't hesitate to send me an email at fred@arcanys.com. And if you like the content of this podcast, please don't forget to rate the channel and subscribe on your favorite platform for more good stuff to come. So thanks for listening, and see you soon.
Fantastic.